Number 1.
I moved to America from Eastern Europe, and this event happened around my 4th or 5th year in America, so my English was still not that great. I was a 13-year-old girl, and I've had other creepy events happen to me, but years later, this one stood out the most since it was a very close call. It was the weekend, and my family and I were preparing for a barbecue we were hosting. My mom borrowed a mixer from our neighbors and asked me to return it, and being my mom's little helper, I agreed. Our neighbors lived across the street, but a few houses down. After I gave them their mixer, I walked back home, still staying on my neighbor's side. I walked down 2 or 3 houses until I crossed the street in a horizontal way before I got to the other sidewalk. I didn't think much of it then, but I passed in front of a dusty brown-colored van. It was parked next to the sidewalk, but its engine was running, and the back seat windows were tinted. Didn't even know it was there. I passed the van and turned right towards my house. I still had to walk past another 2 houses to get to mine. Suddenly, the driver of the van yelled out to me, asking for directions to a street. There was nothing much off-looking about him. He looked in his early or mid-20s, dark hair, dark skin, skinny, and had a Middle Eastern accent. The van looked old and was very dusty, as if no one cleaned it for months. Also, he was parked towards the opposite direction I was going, so we had the front passenger seat as a good distance between us. Anyways, trying my best not to sound like I have broken English, I told him to turn right, then left, then go straight. I was about to leave when he again asked me how to get there, as if he didn't hear me. Being a nice little girl trying to help a stranger out, I told him again how to get there. I was about to leave when he called out for the 3rd time on how to get there. At this point, I thought, come on, man. I thought maybe he had some kind of hearing problem or something. Also, I wasn't so close to the window, so maybe it was me. I had to get home to make it in time before the guests arrive at the barbecue, so I thought, this is the last time I tell him how to get there. I told him to go right and ask someone else for directions. Once again, I was just about to leave when he called out to me, but this time his voice was a little bit more quiet than before, and what he told me next sent my blood boiling. I couldn't really hear what he was saying, so I had to come a little closer to the window. He said something like, "You want to come and see something? You want to?" At the same time, he was quickly showing me something from his side. I couldn't tell what it was, but it looked like a brown handbag or a wooden box. I couldn't tell because he was quickly hiding it away, revealing it only a little at a time, as if to try to get me interested. I was standing there at least a minute in front of his window, trying to understand what he wanted, and then I froze. I understood exactly what he wanted. He must have mistaken me for a stupid girl so I can get into his car and see what this mystery bag box of his or whatever he was showing me. I felt angry, but at the same time my heart was pumping in my ears. I knew he wanted me to go into his car and take me to who knows where. Also, his eyes gave it away since he looked nervous. I slowly started to back away from the car and shake my head left and right like, no. Just when I was about to run like hell, the back door of the van slid open and a middle-aged man, also with dark hair and dark skin, but he was more buff, came out of the van. He grabbed my wrist and started pulling me into the van, saying something like, "That's easy," or "I can make you," whatever, I don't remember. But what I do remember were his dark eyes. I knew I should have screamed for help, or just screamed, but I was so shocked and scared that it felt like I lost my ability to speak. There were all these horrible thoughts that started going through my head, Like, what were these men going to do to me? Is this the last time I will ever see my family? Or how will my family react when they learn I'm missing? I almost gave in and was about to cry, and the man was just smiling and dragging me in like a dog on its leash. Then, I don't know what happened, since it's all somewhat of a blur, but somehow, thinking about my family made me get the strength of freaking Hercules. I managed to pull back on my small wrist so hard that I slipped it through the opening of his grip. I turned around and ran as fast as I possibly could. Apparently, his nails were quite long and sharp because when I freed myself, his nails cut my skin so deep, I could see my blood through the thin layers of skin. When I got home, I was crying like crazy. My mom calmed me down with a sweet treat as I told her everything while sobbing so hard. Like I said, it was a close call, and I had other scary experiences like this, but none of them left me with lion-deep cuts from his damn long nails. Number 2. I was a 6-year-old girl. Moving day. My father, a Navy veteran, had been relocated to Honolulu, Hawaii, a relatively safe place for kids, where most cases of any type happened in sun's shadow or in the dim light of the moon. My childish imagination pictured streets covered in sand, shells decorating the walls of shops and houses, water flowing from open windows and doors as the houses were filled with water. I thought of people growing gills and scales itching across their backs. I thought of school being shared with starfish and dolphins, and our teachers were sharks and plankton. It sounded beautiful to the child me, a truly magical place. Even when I look back at how I imagined it would be like, I wish it was. Time forward to 3 months later, it has been a month since my family and I moved into a neighborhood that houses families that work for the Navy. Hell, my sister and I even went to a school for military families in which my mom had gotten a job as a cashier there. I was outside, like usual, by myself, messing around with a box full of torn-up palm leaves and plumeria lay flowers that I had picked from the tree in my front yard. My mom was inside, watching Chopped, a cooking show that I would frequently watch with her, and my sister was down a couple blocks playing inside with her new friends, and for my dad, he was across the sea on military duty. I remember it was mid-morning, the sun shining brightly above me with clouds here and there, yet no one was really out. I saw a few cars pass near the mailboxes, but that was it. I was sitting in the middle of the grass, next to a plumeria lay tree, just 30 or so feet from my front door. It was the type of house that you enter from the garage, which leads straight into the kitchen. Then down the hall is the front door, to the left stairs and the living room, and to the right, the dining room. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. All of this is important later on in the story. Cars kept passing and I kept watching. I was always fascinated with cars and the such. When a silver van pulled up next to the mailboxes, the windows heavily tinted. I kept watching the van as a woman in her early 20s opened the passenger side and got out. She was decent looking, red camisole and blue jeans. The thing that struck out as odd was that she had no shoes or socks. Yes, I knew people didn't need to wear shoes everywhere and every day, but even I wore shoes that day. The ground was blazing hot, and even the grass was blazing hot. My 6-year-old mind just thought she was getting her mail, so I looked away and backed down at my torn-up palm leaves. I was tearing off each individual leaf when I felt a tap on my head. On instinct, I ducked my head and turned my body around to see the woman 3 feet away from me, smiling at me with a row of pearly whites. "I see you like flowers," she said. Her voice sounded childish, like she was talking to a baby, and not a 6-year-old. When I look back at it now, I never realized just how forceful her voice was and how it sounded as though she had done it hundreds of times. I wasn't at all scared, and I was taught to be polite, so I just shook my head yes. Her smile looked almost like a demonic happy, but my 6-year-old self was always over-exaggerating the real thing. But was I really? "Would you like to come see my garden, sweetie?" She sounded so sincere. I remember so clearly that I was about to say yes, when I heard a little voice in my head scream, "No!" A red flag went off in my head, and I mumbled a quiet and nervous, "No, but thank you." I remember how her smile dropped like a domino so quick and easily, like her smile wasn't even an actual smile. It scared me. "Would you like to repeat that?" She seemed to scold me, looking at me with a face that I can only explain as emotionless. I gathered up the small courage I had and firmly said, "No, thank you." She sneered, then placed her hands around my wrist. "I know you'll love it there." She then tugged me forward and started fast walking towards the van. I whimpered at the pain in my wrist and pulled towards me as roughly and as hard as I could. She just kept walking. Red flags were going off. Fear replaced my horror. I had a waterfall coming from my eyes and whispers and silent, unheard stops coming out of my mouth. She just kept walking, making no sound, but the sound of my whimpers and shoes being dragged on the grass. She wore no shoes, just so she could be silent to get towards me. She and whoever else was in the car had planned this whole thing out. I was a smart kid for a 6-year-old, and my mom had placed me and my sister in karate at a young age to teach us self-defense. My dad had also taught us self-defense and how to get out of someone's grip. So, my 6-year-old mind, by some miracle, recalled my dad's demonstration on how to twist your arm and pull to get out of a tight grip. I twisted my arm towards her body and shoved my arm towards me, and like a miracle, my arm tore out of her grip. The woman stood in shock before trying to grab my wrist again. I stumbled back, fear in my eyes. I couldn't scream or anything. My throat was sore and dry. I couldn't make out a word. I was too scared. So I pivoted and ran towards my house as fast as my skinny little legs could carry me. I couldn't tell if the crazy bitch was behind me or not. I couldn't hear her, and I was too scared to look behind me. I was about 20 or so feet from the door when the woman grabbed a hold of my hair. My hair had never been cut, and so it was down to my mid-back, easy to grab and see. I silently screamed, my throat clogging up my every word. My fear at this point was overdrawn to the point my teeth were chattering, and I was shaking so badly the woman had to grab a whole handful of my hair to pull me along with her. I could barely see what was happening, but I could feel it all, and at this point I could hear the woman's ragged breath and growls deep in her throat. She was mumbling to herself, words I couldn't understand. I finally couldn't take the force of the pain. My legs were scratched from the pulling, my wrist bruised, and my head pounding. I opened my mouth and let a scream. Nothing. You could hear nothing but whistle of air from my throat. At this point, I thrashed and practically tore the hair from my scalp as I ran forward. I was once again out of her grip and running straight towards my door. By another miracle, I made it 10 feet away from the door, in which I was right in front of my living room window. I knew the door was locked, as we lock it no matter what, so I pounded on the window, crying, silently screaming for my mom. She wasn't in the living room, but in the kitchen, and as I could see her head peek around the corner, the woman wrapped her hand around my mouth and chest. She lifted me up and started bolting towards the van. I bit her hand, kicked, punched, wrestled in her arms, but she just kept running, and that's when I heard my mother. I have never heard her scream so loudly in my life than she did that day. She sounded like she was going to skin the woman alive. Even to this day, I could still hear my mom scream every time I look back at this horrifying memory. How broken she sounded, like she was being killed or watching her child be taken away. And that was happening right in front of her. My mom's scream terrified the woman as she jumped and threw me to the grass. I balled up, finally letting out a scream of pure, solid pain. The rest was fuzzy. I could hear footsteps rushing towards me and the screech of tires. I remember seeing my mother's face. She smiled the most biggest smile I had ever seen. Her eyes were red with tears. The next thing I know, I'm talking to the police, shaking on my mom's lap. They never caught the woman. My description was too bland and matched up for many people. The van was found hours after the search as it was left on the side of the road. They found duffel bags, ropes, a muzzle, and condoms in the back, just scattered. I was traumatized for years. I feared every car that passed that mailbox. I ran inside once a car stopped at the mailboxes. We had cut my hair to my shoulders, and we kept the door unlocked whenever just me or my sister or both of us were outside. It would be cliché if I said I saw that woman again, but I didn't. I never saw her again, not once. She wasn't even on the news. It was like she never existed. The after effect of the incident kept me safe, but not safe enough. But that's for another story. Number 3. I'm a 40-year-old female and I live in Maryland. I'm 4 feet 10 inches tall, so I think people may assume I'm much younger. I was leaving Target with my aunt, and we saw this creepy old lady in the parking lot. We really just wanted to leave because we got a creepy vibe from her. Before we pull out of the space, she knocks on my aunt's window, not paying much attention to my aunt, and looks right at me. She was holding up this chihuahua and asked me if I recognized him. I was thoroughly creeped out, and I said no. She puts a skull mask on the dog and asked me if I recognize him now. I said no. It was a hot day, and my aunt said to take the mask off the dog so he can breathe. I think if I was there by myself, I might have ended up in this creepy lady's basement tied up or something. The other thing that I think creeps me out about it is I'm pretty sure, at least from a distance, she thought I was a kid. And then we pulled out of the parking space and left. Creepy Mina here of the Worst Nightmare channel. I hope you enjoyed those 3 stories of women almost being abducted, most of them when they were quite a bit younger, and the last lady, the abductor thought she was a child and she wasn't. So if you have, the last one was a subscriber submission, if you have a story about a woman, yourself, or someone you know who had a traumatic experience or a paranormal experience, send your story to creepymina@gmail.com. And of course, don't forget to comment below. Did you ever almost get abducted by someone? Give me a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. Please share this video on your favorite social networking platform. Follow me on Twitter as WorstNightmare6. And always remember to stay safe.